She had always been the kind of person who noticed things others passed by. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky hangs low and gray and the streets shimmer with puddles reflecting the dim light of the city. She was walking home, her umbrella barely keeping her dry as she moved along the familiar route. The day had been long and tiring, filled with work, meetings, and the usual small frustrations that accumulate until it feels like a weight on your shoulders. Despite the exhaustion, she had a quiet rhythm to her life, one that was simple but comforting. As she walked, her thoughts drifted, half on the tasks waiting for her at home, half on the faint sound of the rain tapping on her umbrella. Then a sound broke through the monotonous noise of the storm. At first it was so soft she thought she imagined it. It was a cry, weak and trembling, barely above a whisper. She paused, looking around. The street seemed empty, the city muffled by the rain. But the sound persisted, a fragile, desperate plea that seemed to come from a narrow alley not far from where she was walking. Her first instinct was to ignore it. She had no idea what she would find there. It could be dangerous. She had heard stories, seen news reports, warnings about how quickly situations could turn unsafe. But she couldn't ignore the pull in her chest, the nagging feeling that someone needed her help. It was not just curiosity. It was something deeper, a tug at her heart she couldn't name. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she stepped closer to the alley, her umbrella held high, the rain soaking the edges of her coat. The alley was narrow, lined with tall, worn buildings. Water ran down the sides in thin streams, pooling in the uneven pavement. The crying became clearer now, more desperate, and she followed it with careful steps. And then she saw her. Sitting on the wet ground, huddled against the wall, was a young woman, drenched and shivering. Her hair clung to her face, her eyes wide with fear, her small frame trembling. For a moment she froze, unsure what to do. She wanted to help, but she also felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down. Should she approach? Should she speak? She had no idea what had led this woman here, what she had been through, or how she would react to a stranger. But the sound of her crying, so raw and fragile, broke through the hesitation. She took a deep breath and stepped closer, speaking softly, carefully, trying not to startle her. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" she asked, her voice steady but gentle. The young woman flinched, pulling her knees closer to her chest, her eyes darting around as if expecting danger at any moment. She opened her mouth, then closed it, unable to form words. It was clear she had been through something that left her afraid of trust. But the rain and the cold, the sheer exhaustion on her face made it impossible to walk away. She knelt down a little, giving space but showing presence, her umbrella tilting to cover both of them as best she could. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The young woman's eyes flickered, a mix of fear, suspicion, and something else, perhaps hope. She didn't move, but the smallest tremor in her body suggested she was listening. That was enough for now. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small towel, offering it with careful hands. "You can dry off a little. You're safe here." It took a moment, but slowly, hesitantly, the young woman accepted it. She pressed the towel to her face, rubbing the rain from her skin. She didn't speak, but the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease slightly. Sitting there in the alley, two strangers connected in a fragile moment of humanity, the storm outside fading into the background. They stayed like that for a while. She didn't rush, didn't press. Sometimes being present, just showing that someone cared, was more powerful than words. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the young woman finally spoke. A single word that carried months, maybe years of pain. "Please," it was not just a word. It was a lifeline. She leaned a little closer, careful not to scare her, and said, "I hear you. I'm here. We can figure this out together." The young woman nodded slightly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was enough. It was the first step toward trust, toward connection. The rain continued to fall, but the alley no longer felt as cold, as empty. In that moment, she realized that this encounter, unexpected and unplanned, had changed something in her too. The pull she felt in her chest, the unshakable need to help, was not just about the other person. It was about rediscovering a part of herself that she had forgotten, the part that believed in human kindness and the possibility of hope. She offered her arm, gently suggesting they move somewhere drier, somewhere safer. The young woman hesitated, but then placed her hand lightly on her arm, letting herself be guided. They walked out of the alley together, The rain still falling, but the path ahead, though uncertain, somehow felt less daunting. Each step was a quiet act of courage, a decision to trust again, to face the unknown with someone who chose to care. As they reached a nearby sheltered spot, she sat the young woman down, wrapping a dry coat around her shoulders. She could feel the tension in her slowly easing, replaced by a fragile sense of relief. She offered warm tea from a nearby cafe she quickly visited, and together they sipped it in silence. Words were not necessary yet. The important thing was presence, the simple act of showing that someone cared enough to follow a cry for help. She thought about how easily she could have walked away, how fear or doubt might have kept her on her path, oblivious to the quiet suffering around her. But something inside had stopped her, had guided her to this moment, and now sitting there, she understood that life sometimes calls for small acts of bravery, acts that ripple outward in ways we cannot always see. Time passed slowly, each minute filled with unspoken understanding. She knew this was only the beginning. The young woman had a story, one that would take patience, empathy, and courage to hear and help with. But she also felt a quiet excitement, a sense that this encounter, though born from desperation, held the seeds of something beautiful. A connection, fragile and tentative but real, had been made. By the time the rain began to ease and the gray sky started to lighten, they were no longer two strangers. They were two people who had found each other in a moment of need, two hearts quietly acknowledging that even in the darkest times, there could be a hand to hold, a presence to trust, and a path toward hope. She stayed with her until it was safe to leave, promising to return, to be there. And as they parted, a small smile, hesitant but genuine, crossed the young woman's face. It was a start, a tiny but powerful step toward healing. Walking home herself now, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The day had started as any other, ordinary and gray, but it had led her to something extraordinary. She realized that sometimes life's true meaning comes from noticing the quiet cries around us and having the courage to follow them, to be present, to care. And in that caring, she discovered a spark of hope within herself, a reminder that small acts of kindness can light the way through even the heaviest storms. The next day, she returned to the same spot a little earlier this time, her mind still replaying the moments from the previous evening. She wondered how the young woman had spent the night, whether she had found a safe place to sleep, and whether she was willing to talk. The alley had seemed colder without the presence of the person she had just helped, but the memory of her face, the vulnerability and fear, stayed with her. It was impossible to ignore, like a small echo calling her back to that moment. She carried a small bag with some essentials, warm clothes, a bottle of water, a small snack, and a notepad and pen. She didn't know if these things would help, but she knew she wanted to offer more than just words this time. She wanted to show that she cared, that she was willing to stand by someone who had no one else to turn to. When she reached the alley, she saw the young woman again, sitting against the wall, huddled in the same corner. She looked tired, her face pale, but there was a flicker of recognition when their eyes met. This time she didn't hesitate. She knelt down and spoke softly, trying to make her feel safe. "I brought some things you might need," she said, keeping her voice calm and gentle. "I hope it can help a little." The young woman looked at the bag, then back at her, still wary. But the hunger in her eyes, the shivering from the cold, spoke louder than her fear. Slowly, she reached out and accepted the water and the snack. She sipped carefully, as if tasting something she had not had in a long time. The small gestures of care were starting to break the invisible walls she had built around herself. She sat nearby, careful not to crowd her, letting her eat and drink at her own pace. Time moved slowly in that alley, the rain having stopped, replaced by a quiet drizzle that made everything feel softer, calmer. She wanted to ask questions, but she knew words could be dangerous. People who had been hurt often shut down when pushed too quickly. So she simply sat, offering presence and patience. Eventually, the young woman spoke, her voice trembling. I don't know what to do." "I know it feels overwhelming," she said gently. "You're not alone right now. You don't have to figure it all out at once." The young woman looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. She hesitated, then began to tell small pieces of her story, not all at once, not in detail, but fragments, enough to show the weight she had been carrying. She spoke about being abandoned, of people she had trusted who had let her down, of nights spent alone and scared. Each word was careful, measured, like testing the water before stepping in. She listened without interruption, nodding, offering silent support. She didn't rush, didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She understood that the most important thing right now was to let the young woman feel heard, to let her feel that her pain was valid, that someone saw it. Hours passed in that quiet alley. Two people bridging a gap created by fear and isolation. She began to notice small shifts, the way the young woman's posture slowly relaxed, the way her hands stopped trembling as much, the way her eyes, though still wary, began to hold a faint glimmer of trust. These moments were small, almost imperceptible, but they mattered. They were victories in the slow, fragile process of building trust. When it began to get darker, she suggested they find a safer place to sit, somewhere with warmth and light. The young woman hesitated, uncertainty written all over her face, but then nodded. She offered her hand again, and this time it was accepted without hesitation. They walked together to a nearby community center she knew, a place that offered warmth, safety, and people who could provide support if needed. Inside, the young woman looked around, still cautious but calmer than before. She guided her to a quiet corner, and they sat together on a bench. She unpacked the warm coat she had brought, wrapping it gently around her shoulders, and offered some more snacks. She knew the young woman was hungry and tired, and she wanted to meet her basic needs before anything else. Small comforts, she realized, often paved the way for bigger steps forward. As they sat together, she asked soft questions, encouraging the young woman to share what she felt comfortable sharing. The young woman spoke of loneliness, of the fear of rejection, of the nights she had cried herself to sleep. She spoke of moments of hope that had been quickly crushed by disappointment. She spoke cautiously, but each word was a bridge between them, a connection that grew stronger with every sentence. She listened with patience, offering empathy, nodding, sometimes placing a gentle hand on her arm to show that she cared. She never judged, never questioned the validity of her experiences. She knew that trust had to be earned, that wounds could not be rushed, and that sometimes the simplest gestures, listening, showing presence, offering warmth, were more powerful than words. Hours turned into evening, and still they sat together. She suggested small activities, things to gently distract the young woman from her worries. A game of drawing, a simple puzzle, even just talking about small, ordinary things. These moments were important, a way to show that life could have ordinary joy even amidst hardship. Slowly, a fragile bond formed, built on patience, empathy, and a shared understanding that each of them had value. She realized that in helping this young woman, she was confronting her own fears and insecurities. She thought about her own moments of loneliness, the times she had felt helpless or afraid. She realized that by offering care, by showing that she would not turn away, she was also healing parts of herself. The act of helping became a mirror, reflecting her own capacity for empathy, courage, and resilience. As the evening grew late, she knew they had to part for the night. She guided the young woman to a temporary safe space provided by the community center. She promised she would return the next day, that she would continue to be there. The young woman looked at her, a flicker of gratitude and trust in her eyes. It was not a full smile, not yet, but it was a start, a small but significant step toward hope. Walking home in the quiet night, she felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. The day had been long and emotionally intense, but she also felt the satisfaction of taking the first steps in helping someone in desperate need. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, that trust and healing could not be rushed, but she also knew that the connection they had formed was real and meaningful. She reflected on how fragile life could be, how easily someone could be lost in despair without anyone noticing. But she also reflected on the power of presence, of choosing to stop and pay attention, of offering care when it mattered most. That choice, she realized, could make all the difference in the world. That night, before falling asleep, she thought about the young woman in the alley where it had all begun. She thought about the courage it took to step forward, to trust again, to face fear with hope. And she realized that this was only the beginning of their journey, a journey of patience, understanding, and the slow, steady building of trust. It was a journey that would teach them both about resilience, compassion, and the quiet power of simply being there for someone else in their time of need. The next morning, she woke with a sense of purpose that made her heart race. She thought about the young woman and the trust that had begun to form between them. Even though it was fragile, it was real, and she knew that building on that trust would require patience and understanding. She dressed quickly, grabbed a few essentials, and left her apartment, her mind already planning small ways to help. The city streets were quieter than usual, the early morning mist creating a soft, almost magical atmosphere. She moved with intention, knowing where she needed to go, guided by the memory of the alley and the hope that the young woman would be there. When she arrived, she saw her sitting in the same spot, hunched over, her coat wrapped tightly around her small frame. She looked up and met her gaze, and there was a flicker of recognition and relief in her eyes. She knelt beside her and handed her a warm cup of tea, the steam curling into the cool morning air. "Good morning," she said softly. "I brought you something to warm up." The young woman took the cup carefully, almost reverently, and sipped it slowly. She shivered a little, but the warmth of the tea and the presence of someone who cared seemed to ease her tension. For a moment they sat together in silence, letting the quiet morning envelop them. The sound of distant traffic, the occasional bird, and the soft rustle of leaves were the only interruptions. After a while she spoke gently. "Would you like to walk a little? There's a park nearby where it's warmer and brighter. Maybe some fresh air will help." The young woman hesitated, looking down at her feet, then back at her. She nodded slightly, a silent agreement. They walked together slowly, her hand hovering near the young woman's in a gesture of support, but not pushing, not forcing. Each step was careful, deliberate, a quiet dance of trust and respect. As they reached the park, the sunlight broke through the mist, casting a soft glow over the grass and trees. She guided her to a bench and they sat together, watching the world wake up around them. The young woman's eyes lingered on the ducks in the pond, the joggers, the children laughing in the distance. She was quiet, but she was observing, taking in the world around her, and she seemed to relax just a little. She began to talk softly, sharing small pieces of her own life, things that were ordinary but humanizing. She spoke of the little routines she loved, the small joys in her day, the way she sometimes felt overwhelmed but found ways to keep moving forward. She didn't talk about grand lessons or advice. She just shared herself in an honest, simple way. The young woman listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just nodding. It was a slow, gentle exchange, a bridge forming between two lives that had briefly intersected in a moment of need. Eventually, the young woman began to open up more about her own experiences. She spoke of her family, the people who had hurt her, the nights she had spent feeling invisible and unwanted. She spoke in fragments, careful not to overwhelm herself or reveal too much too quickly. But with each word, the tension in her body seemed to lessen, and the fear in her eyes softened. She was learning that it was possible to be seen without judgment, to be heard without interruption. She listened closely, offering quiet encouragement, asking gentle questions that invited her to share but never pressured her. She helped her explore her feelings without labeling them, without trying to fix them immediately. She realized that sometimes the greatest gift was simply allowing someone to express themselves fully, to know that their pain was valid and acknowledged. As the morning moved into afternoon, they walked through the park, stopping occasionally to admire a flower, watch a bird, or simply sit in the sun. She noticed the small moments when the young woman smiled, when she laughed softly at something they observed together. Each of these moments was a victory, a sign that the walls around her heart were slowly starting to come down. They found a quiet spot near a fountain, and she suggested they do a small exercise she sometimes used to calm her own mind, writing down thoughts, fears, or dreams on paper. The young woman hesitated, then accepted a pen and paper. She wrote slowly, carefully, occasionally looking up at her with a question in her eyes. She nodded encouragingly, reminding her that it was okay to write anything, to express anything without fear or shame. After some time, they shared what they had written, speaking about their feelings, their hopes, and their fears. The young woman's words were cautious, but there was a clarity in them, a recognition of emotions she had long ignored or suppressed. She realized that the act of writing and sharing had helped her articulate feelings she hadn't been able to say out loud for years. They spent the rest of the afternoon in small activities that encouraged trust and self-expression. Drawing, walking, observing the world around them. She offered gentle guidance, suggesting ways to take care of herself, ways to find small moments of comfort and joy. She didn't tell her what to do or make demands. She simply shared her knowledge and experiences, hoping the young woman could take what felt right for her. As the day drew to a close, they returned to the community center for a warm meal and a quiet place to rest. She helped her settle in, making sure she was comfortable and had everything she needed. The young woman's body was still tense, her movements cautious, but there was a lightness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was beginning to feel safe, beginning to trust that someone could care without expecting anything in return. She reflected on their day together, realizing how much had been achieved through patience and presence. Each small act, each moment of listening and understanding, had built a foundation of trust. She understood that this was only the beginning of a longer journey, one that would require continued attention, empathy, and care. But she felt hopeful, knowing that the young woman was beginning to believe in the possibility of kindness and support again. Before leaving, she promised to return the next day, to continue their time together, and to help her explore ways to find stability and support. The young woman nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of the growing bond between them. It wasn't a complete trust, not yet, but it was a step forward, a fragile yet important connection that would help her navigate the challenges ahead. Walking home, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment and reflection. She thought about the courage it took for the young woman to open up, the resilience she had shown simply by surviving each day. She thought about her own journey, the moments she had taken for granted, the times she had felt disconnected from the world around her. This experience had reminded her of the importance of empathy, presence, and the power of small, deliberate actions. That night, she lay in bed thinking about the day, about the progress they had made, and about the future that still lay ahead. She knew there would be setbacks, moments of fear, and challenges that might feel overwhelming. But she also knew that the young woman was beginning to find her voice, to find a sense of self, and to believe that she could be seen and valued. As sleep approached, she felt a quiet determination settle in her heart. She would continue to be there to listen, to guide, and to care, and she understood that through this journey, both of them would grow, learn, and discover the strength within themselves to face the world with renewed hope and resilience. The day had been long and full, but it had also been meaningful. A step forward in a journey of trust, healing, and the quiet discovery of hope within. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, a sense of rhythm began to form between them. Each morning, she would stop by the community center, bringing tea or a small breakfast, and they would spend time together, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence. The young woman was beginning to look healthier. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now showed small signs of light. The deep lines of exhaustion on her face had softened, replaced by moments of calm. It wasn't an easy journey. There were days when she didn't want to talk, when the fear returned and made her retreat into silence. On those days, she stayed close but didn't push. She had learned that healing couldn't be rushed. Trust was like a fragile seed. It grew only when it was given time, care, and consistency. So she waited, offering quiet understanding instead of demands. Sometimes just being there was enough. One morning, they sat on a bench outside the center watching the early sunlight spill across the street. The young woman sipped her tea and asked softly, "Why do you keep coming back?" Her tone wasn't suspicious anymore, just curious. She smiled faintly and said, "Because I know what it feels like to need someone and not have anyone there. I don't want you to feel that way." The young woman looked at her for a long moment, her eyes glistening slightly. "Most people don't stay," she said quietly. "They say they'll help, but then they leave." "I'm not most people," she replied gently. "I can't promise everything, but I can promise I won't disappear." Those words seemed to touch something deep inside her. The young woman nodded, holding the cup a little tighter, as if drawing comfort from the warmth. That simple exchange deepened the bond between them. It was no longer just about helping. It had become something mutual, something that reminded both of them that compassion could rebuild what life had broken. Over the following weeks, they began small steps toward change. The young woman agreed to speak with a counselor at the center, and at first the sessions were short and difficult. But with encouragement and patience, she began to open up more. She started attending group activities, painting, journaling, even helping in the small garden outside. Each small step became a milestone. She was always there, quietly cheering her on. They shared conversations that drifted from pain to laughter, from fears to small hopes for the future. Sometimes they would sit under a tree talking about simple things, like how the sunlight through the leaves looked like gold, or how the sound of children playing nearby reminded them that life kept moving, no matter how broken things felt. One afternoon, while walking together, the young woman paused near a bakery window. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, and she smiled for the first time, a real unguarded smile. "I used to bake," she said softly. "When I was little, my grandmother taught me. It made me happy." Her eyes lit up as she spoke, and she saw in that moment how important small memories could be. "Maybe you could start again," she said. "Sometimes going back to the things we loved helps us remember who we are." The young woman hesitated, then nodded. It was the first time she had expressed interest in doing something for herself. It was a turning point, a sign that she was beginning to believe in a future beyond survival. The next day, she surprised her with a small baking set she had picked up. A simple rolling pin, some measuring cups, and a bag of flour. When she handed it to her, the young woman stared at it for a moment before smiling shyly. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," she replied softly, "but I wanted to. Maybe it's time to make something good again." They found a small kitchen space in the community center, and over the next few days, the smell of freshly baked bread began to fill the air. The young woman laughed when the dough stuck to her hands, and for the first time the sound of her laughter filled the room. It was pure and real, and it made her heart swell with quiet joy. As they cleaned up, the young woman looked at her and said, "I forgot what it felt like to be happy." "You're allowed to be happy," she said gently. "You deserve it." That night she walked home feeling lighter than she had in years. Helping someone else rediscover hope had stirred something inside her. She thought about her own life, the quiet emptiness she had felt before that rainy day, and how much it had changed since she followed that cry for help. She realized she was healing too. She had spent so long just existing, moving through life without passion or meaning, but now every day felt purposeful. The connection they shared had become a reminder that kindness not only heals others, it heals the giver too. But not every day was easy. There were setbacks. There were nights when the young woman woke from nightmares, trembling and scared. There were moments when she pushed everyone away, convinced she didn't deserve happiness or love. On those days, she stayed patient, sometimes sitting beside her in silence until the fear passed. She learned that healing was not a straight path. It was filled with steps forward and steps back, but each step, no matter how small, mattered. One rainy evening, they sat together by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. The young woman spoke quietly. "I don't know if I can ever be normal again," she said. "It feels like I'm still broken inside." She reached out, placing her hand over hers. "You don't have to be what you were before. You just have to be who you are now. Healing doesn't mean going back, it means moving forward even if it's slow." Tears welled up in the young woman's eyes, and she let them fall, not hiding them this time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me." "I never will," she said softly. That simple exchange felt like a promise, one that neither of them took lightly. In that moment, they both understood that hope was not something you found all at once. It was something built, piece by piece, through compassion, trust, and the courage to keep trying. Weeks passed, and the young woman began volunteering at the center, helping others who were struggling. She found comfort in giving back, in knowing that her pain could be turned into something meaningful. She often told her that helping others made her feel strong, that it gave her a reason to keep going. And each time she heard that, she felt a deep sense of pride, not for what she had done, but for what the young woman had become. Their bond had grown beyond rescuer and rescued. It had become a friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. They shared laughter, quiet moments, and sometimes tears. They talked about dreams for the future, small, simple dreams like having a place of her own, maybe studying again, maybe even opening a small bakery one day. She encouraged her to hold on to those dreams, reminding her that hope didn't have to be grand, it just had to be real. One evening, as they walked home together, the young woman said, "You know, the day you found me, I didn't think I'd make it. I had given up. But when you stopped, when you didn't walk away, it changed everything." She listened quietly, her heart full. "Sometimes we're meant to cross paths for a reason," she said. "Maybe I needed you as much as you needed me." They both smiled, understanding the truth in those words. Life had a way of bringing people together when they needed each other most. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, they reached the center again, the warm light spilling from its windows. The world outside still had its noise and chaos, but inside, there was a peace that both of them had built together. They sat quietly, side by side, knowing that though their journey was far from over, they had already come so far. That night she walked home under the streetlights, the city humming softly around her. She felt gratitude deep in her chest, gratitude for the rain that had once made her stop, for the cry that had called her heart awake, and for the connection that had reminded her what it meant to truly live. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she knew that both of them had found something that would stay with them forever. Hope, not born from perfection, but from the courage to care, to stay, and to believe in the possibility of healing. Months had passed since the night she first followed that desperate cry for help. Life had slowly started to bloom again, not only for the young woman but also for her. The community center had become their safe place, a small world filled with people trying to rebuild their lives. Each corner held a story, each face a quiet strength. It was in that place that both of them found something they hadn't realized they were missing, a reason to keep going. The young woman had begun baking regularly at the center. What started as a small activity to pass time had turned into something much bigger. People would stop by, drawn by the smell of warm bread and the laughter that now filled the air. She would stand behind the counter, flour on her hands, a soft smile on her face as she served everyone who came. Her confidence was returning bit by bit, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. She watched all this quietly, her heart swelling with pride. It amazed her how far the young woman had come, from a frightened soul hiding in the dark to someone who could now bring comfort to others. Every smile, every small act of courage felt like a victory. One morning, as they sat together sharing tea, the young woman spoke softly. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what's next?" She looked at her curiously. "What do you mean?" "I want to move forward," the young woman said, her voice calm but sure. "Maybe get a small place of my own. I know it won't be easy, but I think I'm ready." Her chest tightened, not from sadness, but from a mix of pride and tenderness. "You are ready," she said. "You've worked so hard for this. You deserve your own space, your own peace." The young woman smiled, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done it without you." She shook her head gently. "You did the hardest part yourself. You found the strength to heal." That day marked the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. Together they searched for a small apartment nearby. Nothing fancy, just a quiet space with light coming through the windows and a tiny kitchen where she could bake. When they finally found it, the young woman's eyes filled with tears. "It's small," she said softly, "but it feels like home." "It's perfect," she replied, smiling. Every new start begins small. The move was simple but emotional. They carried boxes, cleaned, and laughed when things didn't fit quite right. When the last box was unpacked, the young woman stood in the middle of her new home silent for a moment. Then she whispered, "I never thought I'd have something like this again." "You earned it," she said. "This is your space now, your future." As she left that evening, there was a quiet ache in her chest. She had become used to seeing her every day, to sharing tea and quiet talks. But she also knew that letting go was part of love. Real love wanted the other person to stand strong on their own. Over the next few weeks, they stayed in touch. The young woman would call sometimes, sharing stories about her new routines, her neighbors, or a recipe she had tried. Each conversation carried warmth and a sense of gratitude that never needed to be spoken out loud. But one afternoon, as she walked to the community center, she found herself thinking deeply. Helping that young woman had changed her in ways she never expected. It had reminded her of something she'd lost long ago, a sense of connection, of meaning. For years she had been living in quiet isolation, keeping her distance from the world because of her own past pain. But now she felt alive again. The act of reaching out had not only saved someone else, it had also saved her. That realization stayed with her. She began volunteering more at the center, listening to others, sharing her time. She wasn't trying to fix anyone. She had learned that people didn't need fixing. They needed to be seen, heard, and believed in. Sometimes she would find herself walking through the hallways, hearing laughter or soft conversations, and she would think about how one small moment, a cry in the dark, had started all of this. One day, the young woman came to visit. She looked different, stronger, more confident. There was a calm energy about her, like someone who had finally found solid ground beneath her feet. "I wanted to show you something," she said, holding a small paper bag. Inside was a loaf of bread, perfectly golden, still warm from the oven. "It's from my kitchen," she said proudly. "I've been baking for my neighbors. They love it." She took the bread, smiling. "It smells wonderful." "You've turned this into something special." The young woman nodded, her eyes soft. "I wanted you to have the first one. You believed in me when no one else did." She didn't know what to say. Her throat tightened and she simply pulled her into a hug. "You believed in yourself," she whispered. "I just helped you remember how." That day, as they shared the bread over tea, it felt like the story had come full circle. There was peace between them, not the kind that comes from an ending, but the kind that comes from understanding that life continues, always growing, always changing. Weeks later, the community center organized a small event, a gathering for people to share their journeys of healing and hope. The young woman stood before the group, nervous at first, but then she began to speak. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words carried strength. "There was a time when I didn't think I'd make it," she said. "I thought the world had forgotten me. But someone stopped and listened." She didn't turn away. "That kindness changed everything. It gave me hope when I had none." The room was silent as she spoke. People listened, some with tears in their eyes. "If there's one thing I've learned," she continued, "it's that even when you think you're broken beyond repair, there's always a way back. Sometimes it just starts with one person who cares enough to stay." When she finished, the audience stood and clapped. She watched from the back of the room, tears forming in her eyes, her heart full of quiet pride. It wasn't about recognition. It was about witnessing someone rise from the ashes and step into their light. After the event, they walked outside together. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, the air warm and still. "You did something amazing today," she said softly. The young woman smiled. "I was terrified," she admitted. "But then I thought, if my story helps even one person, it's worth it." "It will," she said. "It already has." They stood there for a while, watching the sky darken. It was quiet, peaceful. Then the young woman said something that stayed with her for a long time. "When you found me that night, I thought you were saving me. But now I see we saved each other." Those words sank deep into her heart. She nodded, unable to speak because she knew it was true. Helping someone else had reminded her what it meant to be human, to care, to connect, to love without expecting anything in return. As the weeks turned into months, they continued to cross paths often. The young woman's small baking project grew. She began supplying bread to a local cafe. Her confidence blossomed, and her laughter became a regular sound in the center again. Life had given her a second chance, and she was embracing it fully. And for her, the experience became a guiding light. She started mentoring others, teaching them that healing often begins in the simplest acts of kindness. Sometimes she would tell their story without names, just the truth of it. People listened, and it gave them hope. One evening, as she walked home from the center, the streets glowed softly under the streetlights. The air was cool, and she felt at peace. Her life wasn't perfect. It never had been. But it was full of purpose, connection, and quiet gratitude. She thought back to that night, the sound of rain, the faint cry for help, and how something inside her had urged her to follow it. That one choice had changed everything. It had led her to rediscover hope, not in grand gestures or perfect endings, but in the small everyday moments where humanity shines brightest. She smiled as she walked, her steps light. Somewhere she knew the young woman was baking, laughing, living, and that was enough. Because sometimes, the greatest miracles are not the ones that happen in a flash, but the ones that grow slowly, quietly, from the simple act of caring enough to listen, to stay, and to believe. And though their paths would continue to change, the bond between them would always remain. A reminder that when one person follows a cry for help, they may just find the hope they had lost within themselves.